Welcome to Fight Sword Radio. I'm your host, Jake, a swordsmith, armorer, and fighter. Here, we discuss all the same fight sword topics you've heard before, but in ways you've never imagined.
Is your Nippon steel even glorious?
Pain is the base currency of fighting. Let me tell you, judging by how wrong he thought I was doing it, his neck beard must be on all the way down to the well-worn cushion of his armchair. Always remember, fight sword is love, fight sword is life.
All right, guys. Welcome to the next episode. We're going to get dicey here today. We're going to talk about Hema versus Bohurt.
I'm not afraid to go there.
Yeah, it's getting like that. No, I'm just messing around. So when I say Hema versus Bohurt, really the purpose of what I want to talk about is how they, the pros and cons of doing each in the rediscovery of using medieval arms and armor. So I think, this is going to be a pro-con sort of format discussion. Take it for what it's worth. It's just a Bohurt fighter's thoughts.
Don't be rude.
Okay, let's all be adults about this. But that being said, if you are rude,
Why are you gay?
that's the question that's on my mind. All right, so let's jump into this. I'm going to actually start with Hema first. We're going to discuss pros of Hema from a Bohurt fighter's thoughts. First and foremost, the study of the historical source material that's available for rediscovering how to use a sword. I want to define a martial art really quick for the purposes of this conversation. A martial art, if you really think about it, be it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, be it Muay Thai, be it Fiore, whatever it is, it really is just it's a methodology for kicking ass. That's it. If you really want to break it down, it is a methodology that relies on specific principles. So Hema really is a very detailed study of historical European methodologies for beating ass, and I think that's awesome. Give you a couple examples of how I benefited from it. I never would have thought to do something, so I typically compete longsword and melee. That's where I sit in the Bohurt community. There's something I never would have thought to do that I see Hemaists, high-level Hemaists do, that I think is really impressive. All right, so somebody will just come in for just a really simple cut, right? Just cast that sucker out there. I'm sure there's a term for it. I don't know what it is. It's all Greek to me. But I'll see a guy collect with the flat, but he doesn't collect with his regular flat. He binds, or he collects, and then he twists, and then drops the false edge right on top of the guy's head and does it like that. It's really impressive. I never would have thought to do that as a Bohurt fighter, and there's a reason for that. I started in Bohurt in 2014. And at that point, one of the big movement limiters that we experienced in terms of our own personal flexibility wasn't as much the armor. That was a bit of a problem, but the real problem was the soft kit, the gambesons. Quite a bit of armor has survived to be studied, and there's a lot of effigies out there and things that you can look at in studying the hard kit, what we'd term the hard kit or the armor. But not a lot of the soft material survived, not a lot of the textiles, so it's not really available to study. I mean, they kind of had to reinvent the wheel on making a good gambeson, and my gambesons for a long time didn't really allow that kind of movement. It's since been kind of rediscovered on how to make a proper natural fiber textile garment that served as armor padding, but didn't also lock you down like a straitjacket. So because of that movement limitation that existed for so long, I just assumed that's an armor limitation problem. I can't do that. Therefore, I'm not even going to try. So this is one of the ways that I personally benefited from the study of historical source material and to rediscover historical methodologies for killing each other. Is the use of the false edge and the use of winding. The problems really were with my armor, were with my gauntlets, were with my soft kit that prevented even experimenting with that. So this is a very significant advantage of this really tight commitment to only utilizing what is in the source material. There's problems with it. Of course, but at the same time, the idea, the function and purpose of Hema is to stay within the confines of the texts to rediscover what is there, and I think there's a lot to be benefited, and there's a lot to get out of that. I want to get into a couple of cons. Nobody have a panic attack. It's going to be fine. We're just going to talk about some disadvantages.
I'm not afraid to go there.
So my first issue with it is actually the combat system that Hema fencing uses. I want to draw a distinction between fighting and fencing. Fighting is a contest between combatants in the application of force. Fencing is not. Fencing is touching without being touched, and both of those things have their uses and they both have their place. So I'm not going to extol one and knock the other. I just want to draw that distinction. And within Hema, it's called fencing. It's not called fighting. It's called fencing. So I think it's important to make sure we're talking about the same thing here. And because Hema is primarily practiced within a fencing context rather than a fighting context, there are nuances of the methodologies that I feel get lost. A fencing context isn't going to offer an organic opportunity or organically offer an opportunity to discover some of those nuances. So I'll give you an example. An instructor at Trudge Academy in Salt Lake City, Jordan Hinckley, he has an analogy. He calls it the donut of death. And it's basically if you have say your sword extended out and you make a circle, that basically the length of the blade will basically cut a line through the air, and that's your donut of death. If they're within that range, they're within the donut of death. But they step inside of that too close, then they're inside of the donut of death. You can't hit them with the more dangerous part of the weapon, right? That's the idea. Or if they're too far away, they're outside of the donut of death. That's the basic concept. And now, because just the application of physicality is so discouraged within a fencing context, one of the things that you'll lose is how a cut can be used. Say they're inside the innermost threshold of your donut of death without getting too close. They might sort of, if you're bigger and you're stronger, I'll just say it. If you're bigger and you're stronger,
I'm not afraid to go there.
and somebody tries to step in on you, the use of the forte of your blade against theirs can be totally used to completely disrupt their guard and disrupt their footwork and their rhythm, and just force an opening. That's not bad fighting at all. It's utilizing force to create for yourself an opportunity to then strike your opponent. But within the context of fencing, that's highly discouraged because we want to. There's this high emphasis on out-techniquing an opponent. Well, I don't know. If I'm in physical danger and my life's on the line, I'm going to make those openings for myself in whatever way I best see fit. And utilizing physicality is part of that. And that's the other half of the drawback to practicing historical methodologies in a fencing context rather than a fighting context. Is in a fencing context, you're not allowed to hurt each other. And again, that's just fine. We should all be allowed to enjoy swords the way we best see fit. But because of that, you don't actually, there's a lost opportunity to discover if a methodology is being correctly used. If you're not hurting your opponent, you're doing it wrong. That's the long short of it. If you hit your opponent and he didn't say ow, then you did the technique wrong, because the methodology or the technique or the martial art was originally developed and designed to help you use a tool, a sword, a poleaxe, whatever, to hurt another person. So this is sort of the drawback of studying historical methodologies in a much more, shall we call it, climate-controlled environment. Now, that doesn't make it bad. It's just one of the things that it's just what that's the opportunity cost of studying historical methodologies without the risk of physical injury. So those I feel like are a good long short of the pros and cons of historical European martial arts, such as it's presently practiced en masse. So I want to get into Bohurt. One of the big pros of Bohurt is the combat system. The combat system is both a pro and a con, but I'm going to talk about the pros right now. The pros of the Bohurt combat system is that it's full force and full intent. That means the weapons and the armor are being tested. That means we're having the opportunity to test the construction of the armor in an environment where it's actually doing its job. if I wasn't wearing armor and I took the hits that I hit, I would be dead. That's just the long short of it. I would be dead, and I'd be dead many, many times over. So kudos to me for making myself good armor. So that's really the first major point I want to emphasize, actually, is a couple of things that I've learned about armor from Bohurt. The more restrictive in movement the armor is, the more dangerous it is. It doesn't matter if it's heavier and the plates are more comprehensive. If you can't move, you can't defend yourself. And at that point, it's just the law of probabilities. The more hits you absorb, the sooner your luck is going to run out, and you're going to absorb a hit that is going to hurt. So there's sort of a range of acceptable levels of movement that armor would allow for. Equine armor that was to be used on horseback in combat, that obviously was offered less movement, but you didn't need as much anyway. You were on a horse, and you might be absorbing lances and things like that. So the movement loss was kind of worth it. But foot combat, if you compare 15th century Italian armor with 15th century English armor, they're very much quite different. The English armor actually allows a lot more movement. I think probably the most movement-centric might be Gothic. I haven't pressure tested that. I want to, but I'm pretty sure English actually offers it was more well-developed. It offered a better protection to movement ratio. One of the things that has been rediscovered is the use of studying effigies and interpreting the effigy and reconstructing the armor. A lot of Bohurt armorers these days are actually building off of effigies, particularly with body and shoulder harnesses. Both leg harnesses and arm harnesses are, for the most part, pretty. They're all pretty similar. The most difficult reconstructions. Or the most important, I think, innovations that have been made in 15th century brigandines that are made particularly out of the Eastern Bloc. So Galvesky, Wild Armory, they make beautiful, beautiful brigandines, and they are safe. Oh, those things are bomb-proof. And, there isn't a lot of brigandine left. It's not hiding in museums. This was done, when they initially, a lot of these armorers that are building for Bohurt and HMB and IMCF, they'll show the concept, the proof of concept of the armor on a model, and then they'll have on the other half of the picture the effigy, proving that it existed. And it's actually made studying, it's actually made studying the effigy and interpreting it much easier because there are certain markers that we know to look for. What the artist had in mind, what they were trying to say about the armor, like rivet orientations to each other, that actually means something, come to find out. So these are some of the benefits that we've gotten out of Bohurt because it pressure tests the armor in a way that a more bubble-wrapped environment doesn't allow for. And that was actually a complaint that Toby Capwell had, well, not really a complaint, more of an observation that Toby Capwell had made in a lecture. He was lecturing on his book, Armor of the English Knight, year 1400 to 1450. I own it, and I own the sequel, 1450 to 1500. Awesome. He had observed that curators ask what and when. They don't ask why. So Bohurt has really forced us to ask why. The next item I want to get into is actually weapons. I figured something I never would have thought to ask is about the nuances of weapon construction, particularly with axes. Most Bohurt axes up to this point, they're made basically by taking 3mm AR-500 plate, and they're cut out. The axe profile is cut out with a plasma cutter, and then that is welded to some steel pipe that serves as the socket for the haft to go into, and then we drill the hole for the pin that we're required to have, and that's that. And they weigh however much we make them weigh, within the weight constraints, and off we go. And a good friend of mine by the name of Jonathan Cheney, he's been on my podcast a couple of times. He's actually taken to making very loyal reconstructions of axes that are currently sitting in museums. He's reached out to curators and be like, hey, I just have a profile shot. Can you send me a set of measurements? I'd love that. And he just knows how to sweet talk curators to give him detailed measurements. And he's built those measurements, and we've made discoveries about axes from certain time periods. The angle of the axe head relative to the angle of the haft. Those are actually important nuances. An axe that has more of a crescent-shaped head or more of a crescent-shaped edge that actually matters. That has something to do with that versus an axe that has a more flat edge. Say German war axes per se. Those are little nuances that actually matter, that affect the performance of the weapon and how it interfaces with armor. And these are things that, these are questions we just never would have thought to ask, because we're making these objects do something that more closely resembles what they were originally engineered for, which was hurting people or protecting people from being hurt by the hurty things. So I think those are the benefits that Bohurt has offered. It's a little bit more centric to armor and weapon construction, not necessarily methodology rediscovery. And that's actually the big drawback for the Bohurt rule set, this sportified rule set. It limits pretty significantly how much of historical methodologies, combat methodologies, we can explore, because we're not allowed to thrust. We're not allowed to bend limbs against their natural range of motion. Joint locks and medieval grappling, joint locks were really common. Medieval standing grappling looks an awful lot like judo. It's just more violent. Ringen, I'm looking at you. So in terms of building habits that would be good for a battlefield, it doesn't organically allow that. Here's a good one. Because grappling is such a big part of the sport, we'll go lift our arm up to get head control and present our armpit to our opponent to do with it as he will. And we're not apologetic about punching each other in the armpits with the blades of axes and things like that. Like, I'll choke up on my axe and I've got a fist pack, and I'll give him a few if I want him to let go of me. That's pretty normal. On a medieval battlefield, no, my Bollock's dagger is going in that armpit. The way they grappled, if you study Ringen, they didn't expose their armpits like that. But Bohurt encourages it. It actually encourages a bad habit. In that particular sense. I'm just checking my notes here. So within the framework that the rule set allows, we can explore methodologies that are more centric to striking. And if we're striking correctly, if the other guy says "ow," then we did something right. If he doesn't say "ow," then we did something wrong, and we need to re-examine what we're doing. So I think this represents a fairly brief but well-rounded exploration of what both of these activities offer in rediscovering historical methodologies for hurting each other. So thanks for listening, guys. I always appreciate it. Like, share, and subscribe. See you around.